Hi, thanks for joining us. My name is Gordon Brown, although I now write as Morgan Cry. I've got a new novel coming out in May. This is my only plug of the event called Six Wounds. But as usual, we're in the Facebook Club for Bloody Scotland, and we're going to be discussing three books tonight. Dead Man's Grave by Neil Lancaster, Girl A by Abigail Dean, and The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey. But just before I introduce the reviewers, just a couple of housekeeping rules if we can. We want to see as much interaction as possible. So if you're using the chat box to talk to each other, that's brilliant. But if you've got a question, can you do me a favour and just put it in capitals? It will just make it easier to pick out if we can find it. And also at the end, we'll tell you what the other three books are for next month. Yep. So this chat will be available afterwards online. It will be available on Facebook. If you want to go through the pain of watching it all over again, feel free. But what I'll do is I'll introduce you to my three reviewers. Hello, Frankie, Arusa, and Simon. How are you?
Hello.
Hi. Hi.
It's doing well. So what I'll do is I'll introduce each one, and then we'll get stuck into the books. So Frankie Bart is an organiser and host of book launches, publishing events, festivals, tours, and clubs, and sometimes comedy, music, theatre, and art. So far, I've run out of things that she can't do. An artist and an ex-bookseller with a pipe dream of travelling bookshops, taking mostly crime books, authors and events to places that others don't reach. She's currently making her way across Scotland with her own mobile library of workabout and influenced by the unfortunate Lady Grange.
That's me.
That's you. Hi, Frankie. Arusa Qureshi is a writer and editor based in Edinburgh and a passionate advocate for diversity and accessibility within arts and culture. She's the former editor of The List and writes mostly about music, most recently Flip the Script, a book about a woman in UK hip-hop published by 404 Inc. Her work has appeared in The Scotsman, Clash, The Guardian, Gold Flake Paint, Time Out, NME, and many more. And in 2017, she was shortlisted for the PPA Scotland's Young Journalist of the Year award and was also the winner of the Alan Wright Award for the Quality Writing in Arts Journalism. She's on the board of the Scottish Music Centre and is a trustee of the Saltire Society. Hello, Arusa.
Hi.
Hi. And Simon Lloyd, well, what can you say about Simon? Well, he works in Waterstones. Hello, Simon. No, he does work in Waterstones. And the one thing I will say for Simon is he has appeared in many of my selfies, either masked or unmasked. And you can look them up on the internet, but there's a fair number of them in there. So hello, Simon.
Oh.
So the three of us are going to discuss the three books we mentioned. And the way we're going to do it is one of us is going to introduce the book. Then there'll be a little video of a reading from that book, and then we'll have a bit of chat. So to start off, I'm going to ask Frankie to introduce The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey.
Well, what can I say about this book other than when I was coming up with thoughts about a book that I might want to talk about, I realized I had very little knowledge or reading of books that are considered classics in the genre, particularly Scottish classics in the genre. So a bit of asking around, bit of research, and this kept coming up time and time again. So I went with it. And what a book to go with. The Daughter of Time, written by Josephine Tey, was published in the early 1950s. It is, I guess the main character is a detective with the Met in London who is injured and in hospital and is bored. And his friends try to come up with ideas to keep him occupied, including bringing in pictures and portraits of people who have mystery about them in some way or other. And it's through those portraits that he discovers a portrait of King Richard III of England. And that reminds him of the rumours and the stories that he remembered as a child of, the evil deeds of King Richard III. And those of you who don't remember them or wasn't given this part of history at school, there were a couple of his nephews he was supposed to have murdered in the Tower of London in the what are we, 14 or 1500? My brain has gone blank. Anyway, he sets out to try and get to the bottom of this mystery with a group of characters that one will discover more about when one reads the book. I'm not going to give anything away, apart from the fact that I think everybody kind of knows the answers to this. But the characters are beautifully drawn. Though a bit dated, it could be challenging to read if you like really kind of cutting edge contemporary stuff, but it's a good read. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to leave the rest for this phase to Jennifer Morag Henderson, who's very kindly going to read a bit of the book for us because the author, unfortunately, is dead. So over to Jennifer and her reading.
The story starts with Grant trapped in a hospital bed after breaking his leg badly. He's bored, and his friend Marta brings him a series of portraits to entertain him, all portraits with a mystery attached. It was the portrait of a man dressed in the velvet cap and slashed doublet of the late 15th century. A man about 35 or 36 years old, lean and clean-shaven. He wore a rich jewelled collar and was in the act of putting a ring on the little finger of his right hand. But he was not looking at the ring. He was looking off into space. Of all the portraits Grant had seen this afternoon, this was the most individual. It was as if the artist had striven to put on canvas something that his talent was not sufficient to translate into paint. The expression in the eyes, that most arresting and individual expression, had defeated him. So had the mouth. He had not known how to make lips so thin and so wide look mobile, so the mouth was wooden and a failure. What he had best succeeded in was in the bone structure of the face, the strong cheekbones, the hollows below them, the chin too large for strength. Grant paused in the act of turning the thing over to consider the face a moment longer. A judge? A soldier? A prince? He turned the portrait over to look for a caption. On the back was printed Richard III, from a portrait in the National Portrait Gallery, artist unknown. Richard III. So that was who it was. Richard III, Crouchback, the monster of nursery stories, the destroyer of innocence, a synonym for villainy. He turned the paper over and looked again. Was that what the artist had tried to convey when he had painted those eyes? Had what he had seen in those eyes been the look of a man haunted? He lay a long time looking at that face, at those extraordinary eyes. When the nurse came back for his tray, he was still staring at the portrait. Nothing like this had come his way for years. It made the Mona Lisa look like a poster.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was brilliant. Jennifer Morag Henderson's written a wonderful biography on Josephine Tey. She's been at Bloody Scotland as well, and she's been extremely helpful with questions over this. But on the book itself, it is seen as one of those Scottish classics. So, Frankie, you started us off. Just what was your top line views of the book when you got into the book itself after all this time? What were your views?
Well, I was really looking forward to it because I knew it would be a challenge, and it ended up not being the sort of not challenging me in the ways I was expecting, but still challenging me. So I think, first of all, one has to acknowledge that it's a period piece. It was written, 50 something years ago now, and more than that. And as a result, the language is very much of that time, as are possibly the descriptions of some of the other characters. So I think one has to approach it with that knowledge, that understanding, and enjoy it for what it is within its context. I think it's really clever about how it approaches the subjects of, to put it in our contemporary language, sort of fake news, and how that weaves its way through the whole book as the detective is uncovering more about the myth and the story of Richard III. I loved that. I loved some of the little vignettes of the characters, of the nurses and things. And I guess maybe because much of my upbringing was in England, bits were in Scotland, there was a sort of comfort for me in terms of some of the language and some of the very kind of traditional sort of pieces that come out of it that were things that absolutely made sense to me as somebody who'd been at school in England and all the rest of it. And I'm fascinated to see, even though she herself came from Inverness, fascinated to see how those who grew up with a different history can sort of get into all of that. I thought it was going to be a really challenging read when I suddenly realized what I'd done. And actually it's not. It's not a charming read either. It's hard work. You have to focus. It's the first thing I wanted to do when I'd finished was to draw up a family tree so that I could really see exactly how Richard III was connected with various other people. And I thought I knew, but I absolutely don't. And the other thing that it made me want to do is coming back to that sort of fake news thing, is she mentions in the book a couple of other very well-known stories that, again, using language of now, urban myth says X, Y, and Z happened, but actually real life history tells us that something else happened. And one in particular she mentioned that I didn't know was not true. And I'd been in Wigtown in the autumn, and I'd been to look at the martyrs' graves and all the rest of it. Well, that turns out not to be true, people. So I thought it was a really great book. It's not the sort of book I'd normally pick up, and I'm really fascinated to know what other people think. I'm gonna read some more, particularly, I'm gonna read some more of hers. I'm really fascinated, and I've kind of got into that language now, so it's that I'm in that stride, so it's always good. And I suddenly realized this is what copies look like now for anybody who's out there looking for it. So that's the cover you would get now in all well-known bookshops.
No, brilliant, Frankie. And Arusa, one of the things Frankie just said to me, which I think is quite interesting, is that the premise itself actually has so much relevance to today. Even the simplest way I can say this is when I got into about the first 5 or 6, I just couldn't get past. This was the original Lincoln rhyme. Like yes. This was way before Geoffrey Deaver did it. I've no idea whether or not it is, but the idea of the guy unable to move in the bed and solving the crime, for me, just was fascinating. Arusa, how did you see the book?
Yeah, so on the Lincoln rhyme point, I'm not that familiar with Lincoln rhyme, but I know the kind of rough context around the character and that he was paralyzed. But Alan's injuries in the book aren't obviously that bad, and we know that he's going to be fine and get out of hospital. I think it made me think a bit more of Rear Window, just because that's what I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
In terms of like the nature of the injury itself, it being something not super serious, but also the idea of them being affected visually by something in front of them. And I guess in this book, Alan's really, he uses his brains and he relies on his brains to solve cases, and we get that from the start. But he also studies faces. Again, we get that from the portrait that he sees, and he uses his intuition to figure out what's happening. And that's likewise something that James Stewart's character does in Rear Window. As a photographer, he studies faces. So I thought I could kind of see links between the two. And again, in this book, Alan is, he's offered this mystery as a way to stop him going nuts because he's bored. And that's the same thing that happens in Rear Window. He's just bored and he's trying to, pass the time. So I got that connection more, but just only because I'm not so familiar with Lincoln rhyme. But in general, I thought this book was really, really well written, and I think Josephine Tey is an incredible writer, but I struggled to follow the story because it just didn't interest me, and that's totally on me, because I just don't have as much of an interest in history in terms of like royalty and kings and queens. I never have, and you have to kind of really know, I think, a bit of history to be able to understand and get all the names that are thrown at you. So for me, this wasn't a book for me, but just to pick on something that Frankie said about fake news, I thought that was the most interesting part. I thought it was a real eye-opener in terms of talking about how history is written for the benefit of people in power, and that you have to kind of remember that, and things don't necessarily happen the way that you might think. And, you know, this idea of fake news, and in the book they talk about Tony Pandy, which is something I hadn't really come across before, and how, you know, as humans we hold these beliefs and we don't like to be questioned about them. We don't like to question things that we believe are truth. So the myth of Richard is another example of a kind of popular lie, I guess, that's taken a life of its own. And I found that part of it really clever and interesting, but the story itself just wasn't one for me.
I think for me, one of the things I found about it is, Frankie, you said you got to the end and did the family tree. I actually stopped halfway through, went to Wiki and read about Richard III, and then went back to the book. And it made a big difference just because I needed to connect in my head. But Arusa, you just said something that's quite interesting there. There's a classic line in this book which says, when you tell the truth about a myth, it's the listener that's upset with you, i.e. the one that doesn't want to hear the truth. Absolutely. And Simon, that runs through this whole book. That seems to be the thread, which is, and I hate to say fake news because of Donald Trump, but it just feels like it's 70 years ahead of what, you know, was being done just now.
Mm-hmm. And I love the cerebral element of it as well, because there's no evidence, there's no witnesses or anything like that. It's only the thought processes that you go with them as well. And sort of finding out where the source of the myth came from, having a look closer and saying, well, couldn't have come from that source. She was only 5 years old at the time.
Yeah.
So you get to find out, uncover lots of the webs of the story to find out what may have actually happened, despite the fact that there's nothing there, no witnesses or evidence that you can go to. It's purely deductive reasoning that leads you down there, who benefits and things like that. So it's interesting going into the mind of, whether it's a mind of a policeman or whether it's a mind of a crime writer. I always think that's a fascinating element. Which is it, more one than the other, or is it one of the times when they combine?
That's a good point, because the way Alan Grant plays it, you could play it as being he's writing about this, or you could play it he's actually a police detective who's been given a bunch of evidence and said, go fix this. Yeah. I also think I like the way, and Frankie, I think you alluded to it, Josephine Tey, she doesn't miss when it comes to, like, well, Alan doesn't miss when it comes to all these historical figures. He thinks they're a bit of numpties. Like Thomas Moore, there's a whole bunch in there that she just goes, no, he couldn't have done that. He couldn't have said this. And I just felt like that must have taken forever and a day to research. It just felt to me like Josephine must have put a huge amount of work in just to get it to tie it together. And
I was going to say, you know, I'm sure there may be some people who are watching this from other bits of the world, you know. So this book is written about the Plantagenet era, which is the bit that comes just before the Tudors, which is the bit that an awful lot of other people know about in English history. And it's quite a complicated time of twists and turns and intermarriages and all sorts of things. And so even those of us that grew up with English history lessons, which I did, and this is why I probably didn't do the family tree until afterwards, because I was challenging myself to try and remember my history lessons. I was failing dismally. It's so twisty-turny that the research, I mean, it sort of blew my mind how much research she must have done. Granted, she was around in a period where more of that sort of history was taught at school, but wow, that was just base level stuff she would have got at school. She will have had to have done so much research. And so I completely understand Arusa's point that it's not exactly fast paced. It's not contemporary. It's not, you know, I can see it not appealing to lots of people, but just the sheer work and skill that's gone into that. I guess, I mean, it's won a number of awards. I mean, it's number one in the British Crime Writers Association top 100, you know, and I guess I was a little bit surprised about that. But once I'd sort of let it sink in, I mean, it's number 4 in the American Crime Writers. Once I'd let it sink in and realized the sort of the very complicated and complex tools she'd used and research she'd done, it sort of made sense that it was. Against some pretty high runners. I had to go and have a look at the list to go and see who else is on there. I mean, fairly amazing. So, well done, Josephine Tey.
Arusa, it wasn't one for you, but that idea, it's become a classic and it is number one. It's almost weird. There's a line in the book that Alan says to the young lad that helps him do the research, that disappears off to the library and helps him do the research. There's a line in there that the boy wants to write a book about everything that's going on, doesn't feel it's up to him because he doesn't think it'll be very good. And Alan says, well, actually, most people's first books are the best. Now, the ironic thing about this is Josephine's last book. There was stuff afterwards. I know it wasn't one for you, but can you see what makes it a classic? Or what is it about it that turned it into one?
Yeah, definitely. And just on Frankie's point about the research, you can definitely see that in the book, and that's something I can really appreciate, the amount of work that has gone into, just knowing the history, and that is something that it is interesting, even if it's not something that I necessarily enjoy reading about. I can definitely appreciate it, but I think the book is a classic because it kind of comments on how history books, or not even just history books, but history generally, can continue to repeat mistruths and lies that become kind of common. And the story is one that we learn at school, or we learn about growing up, and it's something that's generally kind of widely accepted, I guess, and it's a way that is believable. But I don't know, I think for me the main problem I found with the book was I didn't ever really know who Alan was, and I wonder if that's my fault though, for not having really read the rest of the series, and if I had maybe read more, if I would have appreciated more. But I think the thing that I think is most interesting about it is the aspect of fake news, the Tony Pandy, the fact that when people get ideas in their head, you can't change them for all the evidence in the world, and that's what Alan Grant tries to do in the book, but it's people that he won't be able to convince.
Yeah.
But I think he's so determined to absolve Richard of any wrongdoing. So, but then the thing is, this is a fictional account, so you kind of know what's going to happen. You know that the conclusion is inevitable. So that's another part of it, that if you know the story, you know what's going to happen in the end. But again, I don't want to be mean about it, because I think it's a really, really well written book, and I can totally understand why it's a classic, because of the sheer kind of knowledge that has gone into this, and how the topic will relate, link up to what people have studied at school or know about already. But like I said, it just wasn't one for me.
Well, I think, Simon, one of the things you can say about this book, I never even knew there was this mystery about him not doing it, because coming from Scotland, Richard III was never on the curriculum. Right. We struggled with the Jameses, never mind getting to Richard III. But one of the bits I did let Jennifer Morag Henderson, who did the biography, said to me that when Josephine Tey died, she gave her money to the National Trust. And one of the things the National Trust would get is letters about Daughter of Time, which then went to the person who effectively the Richard III Society grew up around what Josephine Tey said. And not exactly, but she seems to have been able to write a book that people then read and went, well, that must be true. Like it wasn't they came out the back of that, they'd learnt their history, and then she wrote, and it goes, oh, maybe that was the. And that is, do you not think that's it's a hell of a clever concept to be able to pull off?
Absolutely. I think my biggest in to Richard III was Blackadder, the very first episode. He played Blackadder. And then you go from that element there to the fact that he was discovered in a car park in Leicester as well, sort of brings it. It's so good that a book has sort of led to that discovery as well.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned later on in the book, that even though the myth is what everyone knows, not many people believed it was true. Yet it's kind of, as we're talking about fake news, what people believe and what people actually think is actually true, and it's kind of more relevant now than it has been for many a year.
I was just going to say, given what's currently going on at the moment, I think Josephine Tey gets a thumbs up for like introducing fake news as a concept way before. So we have to keep moving on, but that's Josephine Tey, what do you call it, the Daughter of Time. Is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? What does everybody like about it? I did like it in the end.
I'm going to give it a thumbs up because I appreciate how well written it is, but story-wise, it's thumbs down for me.
Okie doke. So we'll move on. So the next book is Girl A by Abigail Dean. So we're going to let Arusa's going to do a little bit of introduction, and then we have a reading from Abigail.
Thanks. So Girl A. Girl A is a book about a girl called Lex, or Girl A as she's known, who escapes from a house of horrors where her parents have been keeping her and her siblings captive. And she's a teenager when she escapes, and this happens right at the beginning of the book. And the rest of the book is her as an adult having to kind of confront the past all over again, because she finds out that her mum, who's in prison, is dead. So her mum leaves Lex and her siblings this house of horrors, and she has to deal with what to do with it. And there's this sense that she can't really run away from her past anymore. And that's kind of what goes on the rest of the book, as she goes to see her siblings, whose stories are then told in the other chapters. And I think this story is a really familiar one in terms of some of the high profile cases where kids have escaped really horrible family situations, stories that have come up in the news. So it's easy to see where Abigail Dean gets her inspiration from. But I really like this book because it's less about what they went through as kids and more about how they're dealing with it as adults. So with that, I'll let Abigail Dean read from the book.
Girl A is Lex Gracie, who escapes from her parents' house of horrors as a child, freeing her 6 brothers and sisters and exposing her parents' crimes. Girl A is the story of how Lex turns that house of horrors into a force for good, but in doing so has to reconnect with her family and with her past to see if she's managed to really break free from the house. I'm going to read from the very beginning of the novel, where the Gracie family line up for a family photograph outside of the house. You don't know me, but you'll have seen my face. In the earlier pictures, they bludgeoned our features with pixels, right down to our waists. Even our hair was too distinctive to disclose. But the story and its protectors grew weary, and in the danker corners of the internet, we became easy to find. The favoured photograph was taken in front of the house on Morwoods Road, late on a September evening. We filed out and lined up, 6 of us in height order, and baby Noah in Ethan's arms, while father arranged the composition. Little white wraiths squirming in the shock of sunshine. Behind us, the house rested in the last of the day's light, shadows spreading from the windows and from the door. We were still and looking at the camera. It should have been perfect. But just before father pressed the button, my sister, Evie, squeezed my hand and turned her face up towards me. In the photograph, she is just about to speak, and my smile is starting to curl. I don't remember what she said, but I'm quite sure that we paid for it later.
Scary start. So, Arusa, what you said you liked this book. What was it that ticked the boxes for you?
So I think, first of all, what I find most interesting is how well the siblings are written, how well Abigail Dean writes each of the stories of the siblings and how different their experiences have been after this one kind of big shared experience. And as you follow the story through Lex's voice, you have to kind of fill in the blanks yourself with the siblings' stories. And it's also really interesting because you kind of get an insight into the sibling dynamics, and instead of being really close because of this thing that they've gone through, it seems like the opposite's happened, and it always feels like something's just lying below the surface. And I think it's necessary to have each of their stories because it entangles how trauma can linger and affect people in different ways. And that's probably my favorite aspect, actually, just the whole discussion of trauma and how different it can be for different people. And I think I generally enjoyed this book because the big action thing happened right at the beginning, and then the rest of it was almost like quieter. It was more unsettling throughout the rest of the book. It was like a big thunderstorm happening right at the beginning, and then the rest of the book's kind of like rain coming. And I just found myself reading it in one sitting because I was so tense. Even though it's kind of psychologically scary, psychologically tense. I'm quite into those kind of stories generally. So those are kind of the main things I enjoyed about it.
And Frankie, where did you come from on it? What did you think of it?
I thought it was a fascinating read. I've kind of swapped with Arusa on this one because this isn't the sort of book that I would normally pick up. So I found it very fascinating. I found trauma quite difficult, and I wonder whether that for a lot of people is the draw, and then there must be some people for whom it's the exact opposite because they're worrying about triggering things and all of that. So I think as a writer, that must be a really difficult and delicate balance to get. So I'd be fascinated to kind of know how Abigail kind of figured that out in her head and what she felt comfortable with. I thought the characters were well drawn. I didn't like any of them, which I think is all right. Do you know what I mean? I think that's perfectly all right. I'm very happy reading about characters that I don't like. I'm sure people would. Anyway, I thought, it was pretty dark, but not sort of, not obviously dark. I think, in fact, Arusa, what you said about there being a thunderstorm at the beginning and then it was like continuous rain, that is what it felt like. And maybe that's what I struggled with, actually, because continuous rain I find depressing. I say that, as we sit in Glasgow with what has been continuous rain for months. But at the same point, I absolutely wanted to finish it. I wanted to see what happened. I think I had, and I'm not going to give anything away, but I think I kind of figured out early on one of the key things that is clarified at the end. And I don't know whether that affected me, but it was a fascinating read. And again, a second book for this month that I read that I wouldn't normally have approached. So I'm kind of pleased that I did it. And there are particular people I know who I know would absolutely love it. I can see why it's been so popular. I absolutely understand that. So it's one that I've talked about now with a number of other people sort of going, this is right up your Strasser. Fascinating book.
It's funny that because I actually expected it to be depressing because the premise sets it up for being something further later on. But Simon, for me, I think, Frankie, you said something that's absolutely spot on. If it triggers something in you, I could see this book having a problem. People thinking, right, I had a problem when I was younger or something went on, this would trigger it. Maybe I just had a really nice childhood. But for me, I didn't think it was as, I actually didn't think it was as depressing as it was going to be. And that sounds bad because it makes it sound like I thought it was going to be an awful book, and I didn't. But Simon, I found that the unveiling of the characters, for me, it was more kind of picking your way through the lives. It was more trying to puzzle back together what really had happened. That for me was the bit that kept me hooked, was trying to put it together. I don't know if that was the same for yourself.
Yes, I think I was a similar situation. I think the best way I can sort of make an analogy of it is it's kind of like an orchestra, but you're only hearing individual pieces at a time. So I think it might be one that I might have to reread and get a complete, having got an overview of the whole thing, and then hear the full orchestra rather than the individual instruments, as it were. But it's a very, very interesting one. I think it's going to be one that you'll either love or not, depending on how you feel as well. So, but I think it's definitely one that's definitely worth a try. And then if it grabs you, keep going. And if it doesn't, put it down.
But Arusa, one of the things I absolutely adored about this, but there was the language in it sometimes. I picked one line out. I just picked one line out, but it's about the father who's, at one point, very ministerial, wants his own congregation. It's not a giveaway in there. But when he can't have it, and he's in the kitchen. One of her lines was when he was doing his bit, when he was talking to them, he said he built the pulpit with his fists and etched the aisle with his fingers. Do you not find there was just lots of those lines that just made me spit as an author?
Yeah, I thought some of those descriptions are really, really beautiful. And I love the way that Abigail Dean paints like a really clear picture with her descriptions of, especially of the house, and the way that the siblings are living and are kind of attempting to survive. And we don't really get much information about the actual abuse of it. It's the descriptions around the abuse. And I think that's what makes it so sinister, by the way she's describing the house and their rooms. I don't think as readers we would have been as affected by the nature of their captivity if it hadn't been for those really vivid and stark descriptions of their surroundings. I think that really amplifies it.
Yeah. And Frankie, I asked Abigail, I said, is there any little secrets? So I just said, I emailed her and she came back quite quickly. And actually, this was quite interesting. She said, maybe the fact I initially wanted to tell the story from different siblings' perspectives, but I actually fell in love with Lex. Also, she says that Ethan was my favourite character. And you said this end different, you didn't like any, you don't like the characters. She says herself, Ethan was my favourite character to write, but without doubt, the person readers hate the most.
Yeah, I actually think that's what's really clever about it, is that she hasn't tried to write characters that we're going to fall in love with and get caught up in lots of pity for, because that's not what this is about. In fact, it's slightly more voyeuristic than that in some respects, I think. So I think it's really fascinating that it came at her from that direction. I did feel slightly voyeuristic reading it, I have to say. And I don't know whether that was part of my problem. I don't know. But I think, I think it's already been a huge seller, hasn't it? A huge hit. And I can absolutely see why. It falls straight into a market that is going to lap it up. I think it's part of a particular genre that is so super popular right now, and so it's really fascinating to see a new one come out of that. And it felt quite, although the thunderstorm rain analogy works really well, the other thing that I think she's done though is it feels like it's written in quite a fast, almost sitting down in one go and writing it way as well, which I think's quite clever. And maybe that is where that whole thunderstorm at the beginning, I don't know, because I'm not a writer, but you've got this big thing that's there, and then you start writing and it's bang, and then it's the sort of grandness of the ongoing rain. Really interesting book, not necessarily my cup of tea, but really interesting.
Arusa, if Abigail's watching this, the thunderstorm followed by the rain is going to be on the back of the next book.
Absolutely.
This book starts the whole way through. Simon, one of the my view in this was I struggled a little bit at times because it does flicking back and forth. To be honest with you, between whether it's the point of view of whoever it happens to be at the time or the timeline. And someone said to me they read their whole way through this book and then went back and read it again later and actually changed their mind about the book. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Yeah. I definitely think that rereading it, I'll probably get another aspect of it that I missed on the first reading. And I think that having the bits that jump back being kind of vague at times as to exactly when the timeline is can be a bit disorientating at first, but once you get into it, you go, right, you know where this is going. But I think it's definitely one that's definitely worth a reread if you didn't get it the first time.
Yeah, because we've got Sue Monroe said, wish I could have read this book in a couple of sittings. as I got a little confused at times, not knowing if I were back in the past or in the present. But what I do think, and I do think it was quite clever, is they didn't use that thing of chapter 1 is today, chapter 2 is tomorrow, chapter 3 is 3 days ago. It was done within chapters. And once I got my head around that, I realised you've just got to work that bit harder to know where you are in the book. And I kind of get that overall. That was because I did struggle a little bit. And then once I got into the flow of it, I began to realise that was the game she was playing with you. You never quite knew what you were reading next because you didn't quite know where it was. And for me, that just kept it going.
Yeah, just to point on that, actually, I think I really liked the flashback type thing because I think it kind of almost mirrored Lex's own thinking in her mind and how muddled everything is for her and how she's not really thinking clearly, and just also represented like what they've all been through and how their lives are not linear. They're kind of all over the place. And I really like that aspect, and I can see how it can be a bit distracting if you're not kind of used to it. But yeah, it's for me just another element of why I think it's well written.
Yeah, and I think on you go. Sorry, Frankie, fire away.
Sorry.
No.
Do we think Lex, because she's such a sort of female, do we think it is? I don't know. I don't want to say this, but I do, because I want to ask. Do we think it's a book that maybe is going to appeal more to women than to men? Do we think the subject matter and the way it's written? I don't know. I know that the people I've spoken to who've read it, that's the direction they're coming from. And I'm just curious. And I wonder if that's why perhaps Abigail was enjoying Ethan so much in the book.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think like when you're reading the book, Lex, initially she seems like the most well-adjusted one and the one that's most successful of all the siblings, obviously until you kind of get to the end. So I can understand why it might appeal more to women reading, because you can kind of see yourself in Lex maybe as like somebody trying to move on from something.
Maybe I've just thrown down the gauntlet, the challenge to all men in the world to read this book and let us know.
Simon, what was your view from?
I kind of like the fact that it was Lex who was the one who got away as well. Mm-hmm. And it made you wonder, Ethan was the big brother who you'd have thought would have been the one to get away, but why didn't he? But I think it's good to have a good, strong female character. I think there's definitely more needed within the realms of fiction and non-fiction as well. But I think she was a very good character, and it does allow you to do things that you might not do with a standard male character. You sometimes have all the various tropes from the male characters, ones that you can't necessarily do. And there's always some things like when Lex is at the party, the birthday party, and steals the tampons. Just men don't know enough about that they should do, and they should go, oh yeah, we wouldn't have thought of that. But it gives you a new perspective on life as a woman as well. So it's always, I'd recommend that men read more strong women characters.
Well, that's Abigail Dean, and that was Girl 8. We'll do thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways. And I've got to apologise to Abir Mukherjee, who does 2 thumbs, 1 thumbs, or no thumbs. I've nicked it off him completely from the previous Facebook, and he'll no doubt slag me off mercilessly on Twitter. But is it a thumbs up, sideways, or a thumbs down from everybody?
Definite thumbs up.
Well, there you go. Well, that's Girl 8 by Abigail Dean. So the last book we're going to talk about is Dead Man's Grave by Neil Lancaster. And to do the introduction on this one, we're going to hand over to Simon to do the intro, and then Neil's going to do a little reading from the book for us. Simon.
There's a new cop, and his name is Max Craigie. So this is the first book to feature him. He will be featuring in another book coming out soon. And it has an incredible opening, which I think Neil's going to speak about. But that leads on to something that ends up opening a whole can of worms, including corruption, gangsters. And I love I think it was Ian Rankin. Yeah, Ian Rankin described it as, think Jack Reacher meets Line of Duty. And I think that is an absolute banger of a quote for the book. And I think that is very, very good. It's very fast paced. and I'll let Neil read from it and tell you the source of the story as well from the title.
Hi there, I'm Neil Lancaster. I'm the author of Dead Man's Grave, one of your reads tonight, and I'm going to read a little bit for you. This is from the start of the book, where Tam Hardy, who is an old gangster from Glasgow, has discovered a rather suspicious and spooky grave. With rising excitement, he got to his feet and began to scrape the thick moss from the large, flat granite surface. He pulled his old clasp knife from his barber jacket, extended the warm blade, and began to hack away at the vegetation. After a couple of minutes of furious scraping and chopping, his work was done. Tam Hardy stood, a mix of apprehension and excitement beginning to take hold of him as he saw the 6 words that his grandfather had assured him would be there. This grave never to be opened. There were no names, no dates, nothing beyond that foreboding statement. His breathing quickened painfully as he tried to suck in the damp air. This was a place. Without a doubt, this was the place. He cleared more of the moss and muck away from the smooth stone, exposing the inscription and removing the trailing bramble fronds from the surface. When it was bare, he stood and stared. The weight of history sat heavily on his shoulders as he thought about the legend that had always said would be within that grave. He tapped the heavy granite with his knife, noting it was solid, unmoving, and embedded into the damp sod beneath. The nasty, prickling sensation between Tam's shoulder blades returned, and something in the instinctive part of his brain told him that he was no longer alone. As he was just about to turn, a soft, almost whispered voice spoke behind him. They said someone would come. He spun round, knife raised. A small familiar figure was facing him, staring with deep, sunken eyes. The bedraggled man was hunched over awkwardly, with one hand inside the jacket. Tom's instincts flared. It meant only one thing. The man wore heavy boots and had a filthy old Macintosh draped over his bony shoulders. Jesus, you almost gave me a heart attack. What the hell are you doing here? He blurted out, his heart thumping, his hand gripping the knife. Who do you mind? The smaller man said in a quiet voice. Aye, son, I'm Tam Hardy. And you'd not be staring like that if you knew who the hell I am, he said, brandishing the knife that was still in his hand, but feeling a strange sense of dread in response to the much smaller, slighter man. It was his eyes, dark and unfathomable, and empty of even a trace of fear. And that was not something Tam was used to. Tam knew instinctively that the man meant him harm. Gripping the knife even tighter, he raised it up menacingly, the worn tip pointing unerringly towards the man. Whatever you're thinking of doing, pal, I'd advise against it. I've killed many men over the years, and you don't even scare me one wee bit. Even as the words left his lips, he knew they weren't quite true. The man smiled, just slightly, showing no trace of fear. His lips pursed, his eyes twinkling, and yet somehow vague and empty. Aye, they always said a Hardy would come eventually. He reached inside his coat, and something long and metallic glinted as he pulled from the grimy fabric to one side. You can join your ancestors, Hardy, and you'll burn with them. Sorry for the accents. Thank you very much.
Yes, we won't blame Neil for the accents. So, Simon, as starts go, a grave that says it shouldn't be opened. How did the rest of the book go for you?
It's weird because having read this one after reading The Daughter of Time, I kind of thought there was going to be another historical element to it, which there kind of is, but it didn't go into that element as much as I thought it would. So I might have thought, here's another historical one, but it's very much contemporary, and the death of Tam Hardy Sr. just opens up a can of worms that leads to all kinds of things happening with as far as gangsters and corruption in the police as well, which I think is probably a clever way of doing a sort of the lone wolf policeman, because that's probably the hardest thing, is to decide why the policeman has to go off on his own. Because like if they were trying to keep accurate, you'd have lots of people would know what was going on, but it gave a good excuse for that not to happen. But it trundles along at a fair pace, and it's one of those that's got lots of short chapters, so you can go, all right, I'll just read to the end of the chapter, and then suddenly you realise you've read another couple of chapters after that. But it definitely leads to an interesting new character, and I'm intrigued to know what the next one's going to be like, because it doesn't sound as if the corruption element is going to be as big a part of the book, but we'll need to find that out in the next book as well.
Yeah. And Frankie?
Okay, so this probably is my go-to kind of comfort read. So I've read a lot of books like this, as I'm sure we all have. And I enjoyed it. I am interested to see where the second book goes, because I actually think the corruption bit is possibly the bit that's the most interesting and the least kind of regularly written about in an easy crime. I think, I like a short chapter, because if I'm reading for joy, we've had this conversation before, if I'm reading for joy when I'm not wanting to use my brain very much, then a short chapter's perfect. So there was lots that was very accessible about this, and I think lots that a very wide audience would enjoy. I think it will be interesting to see how all the key characters develop, and whether we come back to them again, because obviously Max Craigie, what was he called? Max Craigie, is the, sorry, too many books, too short a space of time, too many names, is the lead. But there are other key characters that come up in this book who are part of his circle, and actually I think some of those characters might be quite interesting going forward, and perhaps maybe less expected. Again, it was a very quick read. Actually, all of the books this month have been, stimulating enough to be quick reads, comparatively quick reads. I guess one of my questions would be, and I know we're talking about gangland, so automatically we immediately start thinking, some gruesome, grisly bits, and I'm quite up for a bit of gristle, but I wonder if some of it was maybe there for the sake of it. I don't know. I'd be interested to know how other people think about that. I'm not being negative about it, because I raced through it, and that's never a bad thing. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Neil moves all of this forward. I think that's going to be really fascinating.
Well, Frankie, just to like, Neil's actually said, so Neil's watching. Hi, Neil.
I know, that's why I'm being really careful with what I say.
No. Plenty more corruption to come in the next book, The Blood Tide. He knows how to promote a book.
Good.
On you go, sorry.
I think that's the fascinating bit.
Yeah. The other bit for me, Arusa, was that there's quite a few out there where there's a double team, that dysfunctional take the piss buddy procedural thing that goes on, and in this one you've got Craigie and Fraser, you've got Craigie and Calder, you've got quite a bit in that. Does that work for you, that sort of double teaming in terms of especially Neil quite likes that, and I have to say I'm a fan of doing it as well. There can be quite a bit of conversation without very much description. You're understanding what's going on just because there's lots of lines of the two of them bantering off each other.
Yeah, I think I quite enjoy that in this book in particular, and I particularly really liked Max and Janie's characters together. I thought they worked really well, and I really liked the way that he found friendship and help from her, and just that seems like a really strong, independent woman who just is a force to be reckoned with. I really liked her as a kind of almost like a sidekick, but she's her own person as well, and she's written well. The idea throughout the book of who can Max really trust comes up all the time, and even with her, you think at some time, despite their banter, can you really trust her? Not sure if you can, but then because of the nature of the relationship and how they kind of take the piss out of each other, I think that makes you trust her immediately as a character. And it is lighthearted, and yeah, I think it's a fun part of the book, and just in general, I'm more into kind of psychological thrillers that are a bit slow and unsettling, like Girl A. So I wasn't sure if I would enjoy this one, but I really did, because it was fast paced. You have to suspend some disbelief, and there are, bits that maybe don't seem believable, but I think that's the beauty of it, and that's why it was so kind of great to read. And the point that Frankie made about the violent descriptions, I actually think that they really add to the impact of the Hardy family and just how like horrendous and brutal they are. And I think if we didn't get those violent descriptions, we wouldn't maybe know how much danger Max is in, and we wouldn't maybe believe how or feel anxious enough for his safety. Whereas like throughout the book, I felt very anxious that something was going to happen to him. And I think you kind of needed the violence for that. But yeah, I enjoyed this book. I think it was an easy read, but it was accessible, like Frankie said. Whereas with Daughter of Time, I kind of found it inaccessible because of the needing to know about the history and the complex kind of backstory. So yeah, this is a good one for me.
I'll throw my hand up. At the beginning of this, I didn't think I was going to like this. In fact, for the beginning of it, I didn't like it that much. Two reasons for it. One is that I know Neil's background because he's ex-Met Police, so a lot of the jargon, there is an awful lot of information in here about how they actually do it, which I found was quite interesting. But my dad was police, so any slip-ups, and I've had this before, I was reading Alan Part's books, any slip-ups at all, I'm on them. And I don't know anything about it. My dad was in the 60s and 70s. And I think there was one point where he was in Glasgow and he sends Max into a pub, and it has to be the pub where all the gangsters hang out, and he picks the Saracen's Head. Now, for those that are outside of Glasgow, the Saracen Head is the go-to pub in any book whenever you want to take somebody in and point out that there's gangsters hanging at the bar. But he won me over. And the reason he won me over, I think, was two things. One is I quite liked that Reacher Poirot ability thing he kept throwing in. There's one bit where he drives up to the house and he knows no one's in it and the grass wasn't cut, the curtains are shut, and he does that all the way through the book. And I actually quite like that. I quite like that little bit of he's a bit smarter. And the other thing on the corruption bit I quite liked was the fact that he has to go rogue because no police officer, I mean, it's not given away in the book, but you wouldn't be allowed to get away with it unless you went rogue. And that's what will make it interesting to see what's coming down the line next.
Yeah, just on that point about going rogue, I really liked that. And I think that it's a trope that you see in loads of crime stories, but it can be annoying, but it just wasn't annoying here because you can tell you really believe in his attitude and his skill at his job, and you really want him to kind of fight the power and not listen to those people in charge. And because of how the story is written, there's no clear like good guy, bad guy, in terms of we know that the villains are the Hardy family, but then we don't know who the real villains are in the police. I find that really interesting. Yeah.
And Frankie, you said, does it need to be believable? Some of it's not believable, but does it need to be? Because is it really that type of book?
No, I think that was one of my big questions after reading it. Was, could I believe this happens? And there's a bit of me that's definitely, all on board a lot of the stuff that comes up as being something that must happen every day. But then there were other things that I thought, I'm not sure that would happen. And again, I'm trying really hard not to say some things that happened I'm going to throw out The Streets of Perth. And then those of you who've read it will know what I'm talking about, at which point I suspended, is that the right phrase? Suspended my belief. But actually, that was okay once I'd bought into the fact that, this was, for me, this book is entertainment. Josephine Tey was education, this was entertainment, and Girl A was trying to sort my brain out. That's kind of how these felt. So in fact, I'd left this one to last because I kind of sussed out that was how these three books would affect me. And so because it was entertainment, it was fine that I didn't sort of absolutely believe everything. And to go back to the Grizzly thing a bit, I kind of agree with you, Arusa. It was sort of important for the gangsters. I'm just wondering if I'm aging. Do you know what I mean? I'm thinking back to, and I won't throw the book out here because we're not talking about it, but I'm thinking back to a particular book that, again, we all know the person involved, and there are hangings under bridges in Glasgow, and that'll explain what it is. And that's really grim and gruesome. And I totally got into that in terms of grips of the gruesomeness. So I do wonder if the grisly is just because I'm getting older and I can't imagine that anymore. I don't know. So I'm just... Yeah, I loved the fact that sometimes I was believing, sometimes I wasn't. I didn't mind because I was just going with the romp.
Yeah. And I think, Simon, important, the believability to me is not the believability of the story. That's what we're saying is, would it happen in real life? And let's be honest with you, every book that's ever been written, that's going to struggle with. But one thing Neil does pepper this with is there is a lot of technical jargon. There's a lot of descriptions of how things work and how they go through the procedure. How do you think that fitted in terms of the book itself?
I think this book is such fast-paced that you can get away with a lot of jargon, whereas something like The Daughter of Time, because it's very slow-paced, it's kind of like the difference between seeing the scenery when you're going for a walk as opposed to seeing it when you're in a train. It's just going by so fast that anything that's possibly inaccurate, you're either on to the next part of the story, so it's not derailing me off the story as such.
Right. So, sorry, you go, Frankie.
Can I just quickly throw in one thing, just because Neil's already there commenting, and I see somebody else has put a nice other comment in the chat, which I hope he sees. Is that I hope that more books will do this combination of Police Scotland and the Met, or another force. I really liked that combination. And, when you're talking about the jargon and stuff, actually, I think that kind of helped with some of that cross-force stuff. So I enjoyed that, but also it encompasses more people. So that's always going to be a good thing. So I'm shut up there.
No. It's just Sue Monroe said, it was the best book of the three this month. She liked the way Craigie thinks. Her only negative criticism is the speed he manages to travel up north. And now when Neil lives, the boy spends his entire life doing 600 miles an hour going up north, but small point. So we are just about out of time. So there's a couple of things we need to do before I thank you. The first one is, I don't know if Lynn's there. Lynn Anderson's doing next month, and she was going to pop on to say what the three books are. So before I thank the four of you, if she's not there, what I'll do is, if you can put up the books, we'll just let you know what we're reading next month. So next month, we'll be reading Get Carter by Ted Lewis. We're reading Douglas Skelton's Thunder Bay, and we're reading Laura Shepherd Robinson's Daughters of the Night. So that'll be the 30th of March at 7:00, and it's Lynn Anderson that's doing it. And those three books, if you don't catch them just now, will be on Facebook, and we'll promote it all the way up. Okay, so we are just about out of time. So what I really need to do is two big thank yous. One is to Arusa, to Frankie and Simon. It's been brilliant. Thank you very much for making it so easy. It's been really good fun tonight. So thanks very much for that. And the other thing I want to say is thank you to everybody that's been tuned in tonight for watching and getting on board. As I said, we're every last Wednesday of the month, and the next one we've already put up. So from myself and from everybody else here, including Dawn in the background, who you can't see, who works the magic buttons and all the rest, I'd just like to say a very, very big thank you for tuning in tonight.